I read about a man the other day, wealthy man, eccentric, kind of far out, but he was a man who liked to entertain. He loved to have parties, and he had a beautiful mansion. The backyard, the estate was created just for this beautiful backyard, big swimming pool. And so one night he had a party. All the people in the town came, and he invited the whole town, and they came. They always liked to go to his parties. But on this particular night, his swimming pool was filled with sharks and alligators. Kind of unusual, but he's kind of, like I said, eccentric and kind of far out. About midway through the party, he got everyone's attention, and this is what he said. He goes, as you noticed, there's a lot of alligators and sharks in the swimming pool. I want to make you an offer. If anybody would jump in and swim to the other side, I will give that person whatever they want, anything that they want, if they just jump in and swim across. So he stood there for a moment to see if there was any takers. Of course, he smiled because there wasn't. You'd be a fool. So he turned around, and when he turned around, he heard a splash. He turned back around. There was a young man in the pool, dodging the alligators, swimming under the sharks, and swimming with all of his might to get to the other side. He got to the other side, pulled himself out, and the wealthy man came over and said, "You're the bravest man I know. I will give you anything you want, whatever it is that you want. What is it? What do you want more than anything else?" He goes, "The thing I want more than anything else is to find the guy who pushed me in." So I believe that maybe you came in here this morning to the Foundry. Maybe there's a bulletin, maybe there's a program, or maybe it just happened when you saw my face on the screen and you feel like maybe you've been pushed in the deep end. And so here we are, and kind of surrounded by alligators and sharks. But I want to get on with it and talk about this theme, coming home, about coming home. There's a passage right in the middle of the 15th chapter of Luke's gospel. That's about the prodigal son. And there's a verse, there's what I call a hinge verse. A door swings both ways on this particular verse. It's just a part of the 20th verse. And it goes like this. And he left that place and went back home to his father. Now that's the hinge verse. Think about it for a moment. If you know the story, then you know what I'm talking about. But I'm going to come back to that verse, but I wanted to plant this seed in your head. He left that place and went back home to his father. There's a lot of places probably in our life, in our mind, in our thinking, in our behavior, in our habits that we might need to leave. You may be a person that doesn't really have any bad habits, but maybe you're at a state of complacency or apathy. Well, that's a place that you need to leave, and you need to go back to the Father. What place are you with your marriage? Where are you at with your parenting, in your discipleship? Sometimes people will say to me, I say, "How you doing?" They'll say, "Well, I'm in a good place." And sometimes I say, Tell me what that means. Or they'll say, "I'm struggling right now. I'm in a bad place." So I just want you to, I want to plant that seed. I just want you to think about maybe the place where you are as we continue on. Because, the prodigal boy, he was in a pigsty. And he stood up in that pigsty. He came to his senses, had a moment of clarity, and said, "I'm going to leave this place, and I'm going to go back home to my father." There was a teacher of second grade students, and one day she wanted to turn their imagination loose and their creativity loose. So she said, I want you to draw a picture. I want you to draw a picture of anything you want to. I want you to use your imagination and to draw a picture. Any person, place, thing, that tree, a horse, your pet, your dog, your house, whatever it is, I just want you to draw it and have fun doing it. And so as the children got busy drawing this picture, she walked up and down the aisle looking over little shoulders to see where uninhibited minds might go. And she abruptly stopped at Susie's death, a beautiful little girl, and she was drawing, and the teacher, for the life of her, could not decipher or discern anything, that resembled anything. And she didn't know what Susie was drawing, so she asked, "Susie, what are you drawing?" She She said, well, I'm drawing a picture of God. Really? The teacher said, you're drawing a picture of God? She said, yes, I'm drawing a picture of God. The teacher said, you know, Susie, no one has really ever seen God face to face, and so they don't know really what he looks like. And she interrupted, and she said, well, they'll know as soon as I finish drawing this picture, you know. You need to watch Susie, you know, keep an eye on her, because when she gets older, you need to get her on your sales force or your marketing team or your upper management, because, you know, under the scrutiny of her teacher, she did not cower or buckle. She knew what she wanted to draw, and she drew it without reservation or without apology. And she was a great artist. I believe that portrait of God made its way to the front of her refrigerator at home. A lot of us have a lot of drawings on the walls, and particularly on the refrigerator. You know, Max Lucado is the one that said, if God has a refrigerator in heaven, your picture, you know, is on it. I have a file at home that it's labeled, I have labeled it the good stuff. And it's in a box labeled the important stuff. And if our house ever catches on fire, it's a box that will go first to safety. In the file are countless drawings and pictures, sketches that Cassie and our granddaughter Rain has drawn and painted over the years. And, you know, in the box are other things that were important to her that she provided for me, her treasures that she would give away. And I put them in this, this box, and there were ribbons and some Christmas candy and a charm, a coloring book or two, a rock, and then these priceless, in my opinion, these priceless paintings, especially the ones where she writes at the top, to Poppy. You know. She always drew pictures of me and her, and we're smiling, and she's happy. And I keep those, you know, because you see, I'm somebody's Poppy, and I'm not sure there's many things more important than that. When I was a pastor of a church in Morristown, Tennessee, there was a little girl. I worked with children a lot, had children's sermons during the service, and got to know the children, loved them. We had a thing in our bulletin that was just for children, that they could write me a letter. And I've kept a lot of those letters because they are fantastic, and they're heartwarming, and they're bizarre, and they're funny. But this little girl in Morristown, her name was Emily Green, and I think she was in the third grade. She came up to me one day and said, one Sunday, and said, would you come to my class at school and speak to our class? The teacher said I could ask you, and you could come and speak about what you do as a minister, because nobody knows what you do. And so, so I said, I'll be glad to. And so I went. I was sitting in the back. The teacher was teaching, and then she called on Emily to introduce me. And she came over and got me by the hand and led me up. And here's what she said. Here's her introduction. She goes, this is Gil. He loves children. And then she sat down. Now, out of all the times I've been introduced or will be introduced, I'm not really sure that there's anything that can compete or supersede what Emily Green said about me that day. This is Gil. She called me Gil. This is Gil. And he loves, children. Well, I love, my granddaughter, Rain. And I love the way over the years that she has captured our journey with painting and drawing and sketches. And like I said, it's marked the good stuff in a box called the important stuff. And if anything ever happens to the house, that box goes. You can kind of keep your Rembrandts because I've got enough to plaster a wall with what I call rainscapes and rainisms and everything that she has cataloged along the way. I've been thinking about art. A couple of weeks ago, Craig Nelson put a picture up on the screen of Rembrandt's painting of the Return of the Prodigal Son. And that intrigued me. I have that picture, not it's not a very big one, but it's that Rembrandt painting of the return of the prodigal son. And I started thinking about Rembrandt. I've never really studied a lot of art, but I wanted to study the man, why he painted that. I've discovered that he not only painted that, but he had, in his lifetime, painted 300 biblical scenes from the Old and the New Testaments. If you don't know who Rembrandt is, I mean, it's a global name and it's a common name. It's used sometimes slang and sometimes in jokes, but he was a fantastic, beautiful, wonderful 16th century Dutch artist who painted his whole life. Now, there came a time in the last 15 years of his life, he died at the age of 63 in 1669. There was a series of events that occurred in the last 15 years of his life that were just disastrous. And, you know, sometimes we think of famous people or celebrity people or people that seemingly have it together that they don't struggle. Well, you know, listen to this. You know, Rembrandt, he lived with a woman. Now, that was all caught up in a legal matter from a previous marriage. His first wife died, and he inherited a lot of money from her. As long as he didn't remarry, he was able to keep that. So he had this woman that he loved, though. He considered her a common law wife. And so they lived together. Then society, the church, people found out that they weren't legally married in the church, so they condemned her. And because she was here's a nice way to put it, she was a prostitute. They condemned her, but Rembrandt refused to leave. He was going to love her till the day, you know, that he died. And because of that, wealthy clients across the land began to ostracize Rembrandt, and they would pass him over when they were wanting to buy a new painting or commission an artist to paint. They passed him over. So within 2 years of that experience, he went bankrupt. He had to sell his house and sell his art collection just to try to pay debt, but it didn't help. It continued to roll downhill until he was in poverty, and he became destitute. And then this woman that he loved, this common law wife, got the plague, and she died. And then right after that, his beloved son Titus, he got the plague, and he died. And suddenly, this man is all alone. Prestige as an artist, was non-existent, you know, non-existent. Now, all of his life, he had painted and sketches and all of these biblical scenes. Here's a man who knew the Bible. I mean, he knew the Bible, and he would take an event or a story or a character or one of Jesus' saying, and he was able to take it, cast it, and paint it, capture it on canvas. And like I say, I mean, 300 paintings. Sometimes he would paint himself into the picture. My favorite is Jesus in the storm on the Sea of Galilee. It's a gorgeous painting. But, you know, if you don't know that story, you know, they're going across the Sea of Galilee, 12 disciples and Jesus, and a storm comes up. Jesus is asleep in the bow of the boat, and the disciples get scared. And they wake him up, and here's what they say to him. They say, do you not care? Do you not care you're sleeping? Do you not care that we're going to die? He stands up, calms the wind, calms the storm, you know. And then he chastises them for such little faith. And you just keep looking at that painting. You see the disciples scurrying here and there and doing different things in trying to rescue the boat, you know. But if you count, there's 13, not counting Jesus, 13, because Rembrandt has painted himself into that boat. And he's sitting kind of off to the side with Jesus, and he's staring just right out into the eyes of the beholder. If you're looking at that painting, if you catch that on the masterpiece level, that he's looking at you, trying to draw you into this picture. Obviously, he had a moment in his life that he felt like he was in this storm. And if he had to be in a storm, he wanted Jesus to be with him. One biographer said this about Rembrandt. He said the Bible for Rembrandt was like a diary. It was an accounting of various moments in his life. So he would go through things, and then he would capture them on canvas, sometimes painting himself. the raising of the cross. He's in that one. The stoning of Stephen, that one. Joseph revealing about the dreams. He's in that one. Judas, when he throws the 30 pieces of silver back, at the Pharisees after having betrayed Jesus. He paints himself into the crowd. And so now, he's near the end of his life, the last 10 years, last 15 years of his life. All of these things have occurred, and he's destitute. He's destitute. And in the last year of his life, here's what he paints. He paints the return of the prodigal son. That is dated 1669, the year of his death. Something about coming to the end, being all alone, being destitute, feelings of being in a pigsty, of having left the father, of having broken his heart, of having squandered the inheritance, in a far country. He felt like the prodigal coming home. Felt like the prodigal coming home. Maybe you have felt that way before, He was at that place that a lot of us have been to. If not, it's a place maybe that we need to go to, because it is this breaking place where we can be broken for bad or broken for good. And when we're broken for good, the grace, steps in. Rembrandt was painting at the end the prodigal son on his easel. He died in his studio alone. He had already started working on another painting. At first, he sketched it, and it was all sketched out, and he had begun to paint. His palette was mute colors. There was no pomp and circumstance, no costumes, no vivid colors in the past. This was a picture of an old man holding a baby. The old man is Simeon. Simeon was the priest in the temple when Mary and Joseph had Jesus. At 8 days, they bring him to the temple. And this old man, Simeon, comes out and takes the child. And Simeon says, now I can be dismissed, Lord. I can be dismissed, and I can come home, for I have held and I have seen the Messiah and salvation coming to the people. So at the very end of his life, look what he paints. A prodigal coming home to the father with a strategy of wanting to eat, but the father loves him into a repentant heart, and then the very end, when he dies, he's an old man holding this child. Now, here's what art critics say. Art critics will say that the last 10 years, the last 15 years of his life was his most productive. His greatest masterpieces were accomplished during the time that he was at his lowest. There was a time where I had to leave a place and try to get back to the Father. One particular time, I'm in a sense like Rembrandt. I'm at a place. At a place of loss. I'm actually standing at a bus stop in Atlanta in February of 2001. It's freezing cold. The rain is blowing sideways. Feels like 1,000 needles just hitting me in the face. What I have on at 6 o'clock in the morning is my Waffle House shirt, because I'm getting ready to go to work at Waffle House. That's my shift. Cleaning the toilets, I wash dishes and do what needs to be done there. I'm in a treatment center. I'm living in a halfway house because of my addictions. And I'm standing there outside the apartments like I did every morning at 6 o'clock to catch a bus. And on this particular day, I had been there long enough and stood there long enough at a bus stop that something had gotten, to me. And so I turned to the rain that was blowing into my face, and I asked this question, how did I get here? I encourage people that I work with now for these 15 years since then to ask themselves sometimes that question. How did you get to the place where you are? And where is the place that you think you want to be? How did I get here? And for the first time, I didn't cast blame. I didn't try to find a reason while I was there. I took it on, man. I took it on, and it knocked the soul, right out of me. And I ask a second question, and it's this: what have I done? Now, I want to interject this. There's a fine line between not those two questions, but these two questions that I'm getting ready to share with you. When I stood there at that bus stop, how did I get here? What have I done? In the past, here had been my question: what's going to happen to me? The question I asked that day is totally different. What have I done? What have I done? Rather than what's going to happen to me. See, I'm still caught up with me, still concerned about me. What's going to be the outcome of this? When I confess, what have I done? I was willing, to take it on. Now, some would disagree, but, I sold cars for a couple of years and worked my way back. But since that time, I've been a part of 2 Celebrate Recoveries in 2 different states in 2 different kinds of churches over the last 14, 15 years. And so I would say, compared to 25 years as an ordained minister, God used that. But this has been, for me, the last part of my life, the last 10 or 15 years have been, for me, the most productive, when seemingly people thought I was at my worst. But God said, you're at your best, because when you hit rock bottom, he goes, thank God, you're finally here. It took me a long time to get there, and God said, now we can begin. This story of the prodigal son is what was on Rembrandt's mind. And it was on my mind too, at times like the bus stop, where the boy, it comes home. He has planned a strategy, and he comes home to the unconditional love of his father. But that hinge verse is key. He had to leave the place where he was in order to get to where he wanted to be. Where he wanted to be, he was hungry. Father has food. Servants eat. He wanted to go home. He didn't know that the father would run to greet him. He didn't know that the father would scoop him up and love him unconditionally. Some people can read that story and they can say, pigsty. He was feeding pigs. He was a Jew feeding pigs. That's kind of interesting in itself. But I know what a pigsty smells like. I know what it smells like to have lost everything and try to get back home to the Father, and surprised by His grace that He would love, somebody like me. I want to close with this, and it's a true story. I think I read it from out of a book by Philip Yancey. Philip Yancey wrote a book about amazing grace. What's so amazing, about grace? Well, he tells this true story about a young girl. She's, 15, and lives at home with her parents, and she's the only child, and she starts to get into that phase of rebellion and rebelliousness. She took it to a degree that was hard for the parents. She got into this Gothic mindset, started dressing in black. She wanted to be pierced. The people she hung out with, the parents forbade her being that, listening to that music and doing that. And every night, their home was a war zone between the parents and this child of theirs. They loved this child, but the child was way out in the far country somewhere. And they didn't know how to get her back. One day she came in and she said, I hate both of you. And she ran away. Now, this is in Michigan, and I don't know if I say it right, but it's Traverse City in Michigan. She ran away, caught a bus, and she went to Detroit, about 100 miles away. In Detroit, a man, here's how she put it, a man with a very nice car found her. And he put her up in an apartment and gave her jewelry and gave her clothes and only the best. All she had to do was provide a companionship for wealthy businessmen when they would come into town, and she gladly did that. On the arm of a wealthy man, she felt like somebody, In that apartment, she felt like somebody. Putting on that jewelry, she felt like she had arrived until she got sick. She got sick. She thought the man would take care of her, but he didn't. He kicked her out of the apartment. She's homeless, sick, really sick, on the streets of Detroit. She finds in the back of this department store, in an alley, there's a grate where steam in the cold will rise. That's where she began to sleep. Because it was warm, she would sleep on the grate. And at some point, she stood up on that grate, her pigsty, and she said, I want to go home. She said, I want to go home. I don't know if they will take me back because they don't even know I'm alive. She knew she had to call them, but she was scared they would answer, and they didn't. The answer machine came on, and she said, I'm going to buy a bus ticket. It gets into Traverse City at midnight tomorrow night. And I'm coming home. I'm sick, and I want to come home. If you're at the bus station, then I'll come home with you. If you're not there, that means for me to keep on traveling, and I will do that. She found this broken compact mirror, and she fixed herself up the best she could. And she was scared to death on that bus trip, but it finally pulled in right on time, midnight. And she got out, and here, this was the moment. This was a moment. And so she walks into this dingy, dimly lit bus station downtown in in Traverse City. And she walked in, and what she saw there, she could not have imagined in 1,000 years. Her parents were there, but so were grandparents and uncles and aunts and cousins and friends. There were 50 people there cheering, with a big sign on the wall that said, "Welcome home." A sick child, having run away and squandered her life, prostituted herself, drugs, alcohol, all of it. And there she stands being greeted by all these family members and friends. The father breaks through. The daughter has formed a speech, just like the prodigal did. As soon as he gets up to her, she starts, "Father, he puts his hand right on her lips, says, "You're home." Just like the prodigal father said, you were lost, now you're found. You were blind, now you see. You were dead, and now you are alive. It's not what he said, but that's what he meant when he hugged her. Hugged her and said, "Let's, go home." And so the prodigal left the place where he was. So that girl left the grate that she slept on. I'm at a bus stop, cleaning toilets, and there's nothing wrong with that job, but it was a place that I needed to leave, and I needed to go back to the Father. And if you can't make that journey, He'll come to you because, even when the prodigal was a far way off, the Father ran to him. And may the Father run to you today, and may you experience that grace. God bless you.